Ben Riggs presents Reading D&D Aloud. Episode 58 with Ryan Dancey. Did this guy save Dungeons and Dragons?
Like 150,000 years, no cities. All of a sudden, in multiple places around the world, some of which are not possible that they could possibly have been connected, Mesoamerica and Eurasia, cities. Like, what happened? What caused it then? And not 140,000 years. Like, I'm just fascinated by the whole thing.
So I sent my book proposal for book two of my D&D history series into my editor, and again, it's just the proposal phase, and the editor gets back to me and says, "Can you broaden your scope somehow? Can you kind of put D&D in sort of a bigger historical context?" So I started with us leaving Africa 150,000 years ago, or whatever it is,
Right?
and and I look at it and I'm like, man, it was like 80,000 years before we developed clothing.
Right?
So I try starting this new sample chapter out with something like human beings had millennia after millennia of nudity to contend with.
Right.
And my editor is like, maybe that's too much context.
Too much context.
Yeah, maybe it's we don't need that, maybe.
Yeah,
all right.
That's crazy.
But so this is Ryan Dancey. He is a shining star in the tabletop role-playing game Firmament. Oh, it's only going to get more embarrassing from here, Ryan.
Wow.
And we just started chatting about, history, prehistory, and Ryan started waxing poetic about the fact that we're biologically the same as prehistoric humans, and yet we know almost nothing about these people. But so I hit record thinking that people would find what he was saying of value. But now I will go to my pre-written introduction to thoroughly embarrass him. So, audience, I ask you, who saved Dungeons and Dragons? How many people could say that they saved Dungeons and Dragons? And off the top of my head, I'm going to say that the list of people who could say they saved D&D at some point over the course of its 51-year history is less than 20 people. But I believe that Ryan Dancey is one of those people who could credibly tell a story explaining how he saved D&D with me today. Ryan is like a Rhode Island private who just happened to be at every major battle of the Civil War. He seems to have been present at a number of important moments during the transplantation of D&D from TSR to Wizards of the Coast. He went to Lake Geneva as part of a team to negotiate an initial purchase with TSR CEO Lorraine Williams. Then, when D&D landed at Wizards, he found himself in charge of D&D and had to figure out how to make the game make money again. Now, most people I have on this show, it's my first time meeting them, but Ryan, I feel like, is a friend, and as a friend, I can push him right into the deep end and ask the most obnoxious and SEO optimized question possible, which I will do now by asking Ryan. Ryan, how did you save D&D?
Wow. I
Sorry.
am a business genius, and my plan worked.
That's a great summary. Would you be willing to expound?
Yeah, I think, Ben, when you and I first started talking, I told you that in the 90s, I was incredibly arrogant, and I have tried to become less arrogant over time. So what I just told you is probably what my heart believes is true, even though it sounds unbelievably arrogant.
I mean, again, you can tell that. I would tell you, I think that's a reasonable story to tell as a historian. Like, that's not crazy talk.
Yeah.
Like, you can tell that story. Please tell that story. The audience would love to hear about your genius.
So the most important thing that people need to know is that when Wizards of the Coast acquired TSR, Dungeons and Dragons was essentially a dead business or a dying business. Like, it was catastrophically bad. And radical change is usually only possible in times of intense crisis. If Wizards had bought TSR as a normal business transaction of a growing successful company buying one of its competitors, we would not have been able to do the kinds of things that we did with Dungeons and Dragons. We would have had an entirely different plan, I'm sure. And I might never have been involved in it. It took something as radical as the almost total financial collapse of TSR for a guy like me in the position I was in to be involved, and then to have the lever and the place to stand to shift the business as much as I did when I had the chance. So, I mean, just to begin, I'm just going to say conditions precedent were TSR made really bad business decisions, compressed into a very short amount of time, which massively undermined their ability to continue as a business. I worked for a company that was run by a guy who had intense testicular fortitude and was able to make phone calls and get meetings and convince people to do things that I would never have the ability to do
And
because he
this
was
was
so good
not
at
this
selling.
was not Wizards, right?
No, I'm talking about Bob Abramowitz, who was the CEO that we hired to run Five Rings Publishing Group. Bob is the reason that the deal happened. He made the personal connections with Lorraine Williams to make it happen, right? Um, and then I was fortunate enough to live in the same area as the guys who founded Wizards of the Coast, to know them as friends, and to have earned enough of their respect that when they needed to solve the problem of who is going to try to fix this collapsing, dying business, I was on the list of people that they would consider. So there was a ton of things completely beyond my control that had to happen for me to get my butt in that seat. Um, what I will say is I like to think I did the very best I could with the seat once my butt was in it. Right. So what did we do? We started by doing a very painful triage of the business of Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games in general that TSR had and had been acquired by Wizards. We ruthlessly pruned the number of products that were in production. We made some people intensely unhappy because we stopped them from being able to work on creative things that really mattered to them, for which I feel badly, although I still would do the same thing. Like I could
Is
feel
this
the pain.
Alternity?
Yeah, Alternity was probably the biggest one, but there were other projects at that in that business unit that we killed. The Hero system, the fifth edition Dragonlance thing, which also was the genesis in some way of the Saga system, which was being used for the Marvel games that TSR was doing. There were whole lines of D&D products that we killed. There were versions of D&D that weren't D&D that we killed. Yeah, so we were, when I say we, I mean the team of people that I was fortunate enough to work with on the brand and the business team, and the creative team that was run by Bill Slavisek, who was the head of the tabletop RPG business. So our brand and business team was kind of the driver of strategy. But I really have to be careful to never discount Bill's, significant participation in those processes and then the delivery of the great products that came after. So
I'm sorry,
you're
there's a
gonna
bug
you're
bug
gonna
I
hear
have
me
to kill
talk a
on the
lot about
wall.
business, but there was a
Ah!
whole creative thing happening that is as important as what we were doing. So we got a handle on what we should be making that were products that actually made a profit as opposed to products that we lost money on every unit we sold. And we helped lay the groundwork for third edition. That was a primarily creative driven project, but there was a lot of business decisions that went along with doing third edition. Um, and then I think the thing that I personally had the most direct hands-on stuff was the open gaming license and pushing the company to adopting the idea of quote, air quotes open sourcing Dungeons and Dragons.
My God, so in case there's someone who does not know what the open gaming license is in 2025, what's the open gaming license?
The open gaming license is a copyright license which uses a mechanism called copyleft to give people the right to make derivative works of material that is licensed with that license without asking permission or paying a royalty. And then we licensed essentially the entire product of third edition Dungeons and Dragons with that license.
Um, where to go from there? Um, I'll ask this. So, Um, because again, I've been interviewing tons and tons of people that got fired by Wizards in the past 3 years.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I mean, they're fascinating interviews.
Sure.
Um,
They're on the outside.
yeah. Uh, and the story they tell is one of the lawyers being like, "What the hell is this license?
Oh, yeah.
Why on earth would anyone do this?"
Yep.
Um, and again, like revisionist history, where and I think I emailed you about this, but like uh, coming back to I can't believe that we couldn't even make video games. So supposedly, one of the things that became a bee in the bonnet of Wizards of the Coast CEO Chris Cox was a French D&D-esque video game called Scholastic Crown of the Magister,
Yep.
and it was produced under the Open Gaming license, and the video game press picked up on, oh, it's not D&D. It's a D&D video game, but it's not D&D, but it's D&D. And a lot of the marketing was this D&D clone will amaze you, blah 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 blah. And Chris Cox was like, what the hell? How am I going to turn D&D into a billion-dollar brand if I cannot even leverage our content for a video game? This cannot be allowed. We need a new revised OGL, and while we're at it, let's just kill the whole thing in some way, shape, or form. So, if as one of the godfathers of the OGL, again, I always think of you, Brian Lewis, and Scaff Elias as the triumvirate that I shout out whenever I can.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that's fair. I'd throw
but
Peter in there.
pardon?
I'd throw Peter Atkinson's
Oh, and
name in.
Peter Atkinson. Okay, that is also more than fair to throw him in there. Um, what would you say if Chris Cox came to you and was like, "What have you done to my brand?" Like 25 years after the fact.
Okay. Oh, there's so many things I could say, Ben.
Oh, say them all. This is going to be great.
Let's start with this. Who cares? What what possible damage did the existence of that game cause to the Hasbro's ability to extract long-term value out of Dungeons and Dragons? It's a non-entity. It's a nothing burger. Like 10,000 people played it once on Steam. Like, come on, give me a break. Like, how do you not think that World of Warcraft is a bigger threat to your ability to license and make money off Dungeons and Dragons than this obscure one-off French RPG? 10 million people played World of Warcraft, every month at a certain point. Like, yeah, it's crazy talk. It's like it never ceases to amaze me how people fixate on the fact that it is possible to have done a thing, and therefore the mere possibility of doing it ruins something else completely. Like the fly in the ointment argument, right? Well, what if Disney tried to do what those guys in France did, right? And my response would be, what if they do it without you? Like they could do it right now, and you can't stop them. Everything that you would want to do in a role-playing game in a digital environment can be done without a license from Wizards of the Coast because Wizards doesn't own anything that's protectable. So all that they're getting by using the open gaming license is telling a lot of people, hey, if you follow a bunch of threads all the way back, you find Dungeons and Dragons, you should play it. Like it's a crazy argument.
Well, and this is one of the things that I find very interesting, and again, in a lot of these exit interviews, there does not seem to be an understanding of it, which
Yeah.
is that a lot of the things that we think of when we say D&D, they might be trademarked,
Yes.
but a lot of it, you take the file numbers off. It's pretty easy to use it on your own legally,
Yes.
and there's
Yes.
not a lot of there of the D&D IP. Uh,
Virtually.
and the OGL in many ways forces people towards Wizards and
Yes.
kind of keeps them in a community. And Jim Lauder will loudly shout at people, being like, "The OGL was like this thing that allowed Wizards to take control of the whole industry, and it worked." Ah, and he'll wave a flag like it's a bad thing. And it's just interesting because he's like, it was successful in the nefarious plan that Ryan had all along. Ah. But sorry,
Right.
go ahead.
So right now, in the United States, I mean, the laws are different around the world, but in the United States, I could make a video game and I could say on the cover of that video game, compatible with Dungeons and Dragons. And Hasbro could sue me and they would lose. It might cost me an arm and a leg to fight the lawsuit, but the law is I can make that claim. There's some limits to that. It probably actually has to be compatible with Dungeons and Dragons. Like I can't lie about it. I can't use the graphic of Dungeons and Dragons. I would just have to put the words Dungeons and Dragons in a generic typeface. But I can make that claim that my work is compatible with Dungeons and Dragons. If I publish my product using the Open Gaming License, I cannot make that claim. The Open Gaming License adds restrictions which do not exist in trademark law, and they limit my scope of action. Using the Open Gaming License protects the Dungeons and Dragons trademark more than there not being an Open Gaming License. Like fundamentally, it protects the trademark. And it amazes me that really good lawyers don't seem to grasp that. I mean, the Open Gaming License is less than a page long. It's written in language that like a sixth grader could understand. And that specific issue that you can't use trademarks without permission is its own bullet point, and the whole thing is like 3 sentences. It's not super complicated. It should be obvious that that is the case, right? And yet I keep hearing from certain people associated with that company that the Open Gaming License lets people use their trademarks without permission. It's mind-boggling to me. It's the exact opposite.
Well, and I will tell you, at least in fairness, that's not something I've heard from the people who have left the company.
Yeah.
And again, the vast majority of them,
Yeah.
so far, everyone has passed the buck up to Cynthia Williams and Chris Cox.
Yeah.
No one, even people that were on the team designed to take apart the Open Gaming License are like, it
Yeah.
wasn't my idea. I tried to talk him out of it, but I
So-
just paid to do it. So, you know.
So the second thing I would say is that I actually think the Open Gaming License is fundamentally incompatible with software. I personally, my opinion is that it's very difficult to use the Open Gaming License in conjunction with software. I personally think that one of the only ways to do it is with an open source software project where the source code is available to the recipients. I think that once you compile it into a binary, it becomes very difficult to say you're successfully complying with the OGL. Now, I know that Brian Lewis disagrees with me, and I'm certain there are other people out there who disagree with me. It's never been tested in court. That argument's never been made either way. But one of the conditions the OGL imposes upon you is that you are required to clearly identify any content in the work that you are distributing, which is open game content. And open game content includes not only your own copyrighted material that you have created from scratch, but anything that is a derivative work of other open gaming content. So how do you clearly identify in a video game binary what parts of the binary are open game content? Because when you compile it, you have created a derivative work. I would argue the entire work is a derivative work, but that's another out of scope argument, right? So in a book, it's relatively easy to say, chapters 1 and 5 are open game content, or anything that's in this box with this red line around it is open game. Like it's relatively easy to say what is and is not open gaming content. But in a digital compiled binary, it is super, super, super hard. And I think that if Hasbro wanted to chill the idea that you could use the Open Gaming License to make a video game, they should sue somebody. They should sue. They should claim that those people are violating the Open Gaming License and that they're going to revoke their right to use the Open Gaming License because they violated the terms of the license. Now, why don't they do that? Well, I will now speak a little bit for Brian Lewis, and he might disagree with what I'm about to say, but this is what I think Brian Lewis would say.
I should shout out briefly Brian Lewis, lawyer. He wrote the Open Gaming License and is now president or CEO of Gen Con. I forget which.
The chairman of the board.
Chairman of the board. Okay, so sorry, please continue.
Yeah, I think Brian would say that they will lose. That if Hasbro took a company into court and tried to sue over the Open Gaming License, they would lose. That's why they don't sue, because they can't win. Well, what does that mean? Well, it kind of means the license doesn't actually mean anything, right? If you can't sue to enforce it, what good is it? Okay, that's my second issue. Here's my third issue. I was at Wizards of the Coast when we did the deal to license Star Wars. And one of the things that happened with the Star Wars license is that the Star Wars people, Lucasfilm, they were very uncomfortable with the fact that there was a whole bunch of Star Wars product that had been produced that they did not clearly have the right to use themselves. All that West End game stuff. And there was video games that had been produced that they weren't sure that they had the rights to use content in some of those video games, some of those games not produced by Lucas. And they required, as a part of the contract with Wizards of the Coast, that they be granted an irrevocable, perpetual, worldwide license to use the game system that was going to be in the Star Wars role-playing game. And they used it in conjunction with BioWare to make Knights of the Old Republic. Not only did they use it, but people at Wizards of the Coast helped BioWare figure out how to implement D20 Star Wars into Knights of the Old Republic. Like, it's incontrovertible that Lucas has that right. So, like, there's at least one entity out there that really matters that has the rights to use D20 any way they want to forever without asking permission or paying a royalty. That thing happens to be owned by Disney. And I would argue that Disney, therefore, probably inherited that right. So if I was Disney's attorney, I would say I can use it any place I want to for anything. But that's just me. So, yeah.
I can't believe.
Fundamentally, one of the reasons that I am so angry about what they tried to do with the OGL is that their stated reason for doing so is illogical. It isn't a true thing. Like, the thing that's bothering them isn't real.
So you're saying that they couldn't bring the D&D game back totally under their control in the way they tried to do with OGL 1.0A, I think it was?
Can't be done anyway. Can't be done anyway. And look, we know what happens when you try to make a game that's Dungeons and Dragons, but it's not Dungeons and Dragons. It's called a fantasy heartbreaker. Fantasy heartbreaker is a term of art in the industry that means that you basically made your version of D&D, except like you made armor class go down instead of up, or you have a super complicated timing system that determines that daggers hit things faster than swords, and they don't succeed. They don't. Like, you can go through the archives of fantasy role-playing games and find game after game after game, which is almost entirely Dungeons and Dragons, except for some little thing that the designer really had a bugaboo about and wanted to fix. And no one ever plays them because you should just play Dungeons and Dragons. And if that one little thing that the designer was obsessed with is they actually fixed it in some way, homebrew it into your D&D game. Like, what's stopping you?
So how did the OGL lead in some way, hopefully, to the salvation of Dungeons and Dragons from the pits it was in at TSR?
Yeah. Okay, so what's the most important thing about the open gaming license? It reduces risk to zero. I tell people this all the time. The purpose of the open gaming license is to get rid of risk. We can argue whether natural copyright law in the United States or Europe or China would allow me to make a derivative work of Dungeons and Dragons and publish it. That's an argument. And there's good arguments on both sides. Like, it is not clear who would win that if it went to court. And you might get a different decision in different venues, depending on where the case was heard. It's risky. It means that if you publish that game, you don't really know if you're going to get sued. You don't really know if you get sued, if you're going to win. And risk makes it almost impossible to do a thing in business. You don't want to do risky things. There's lots of things you could do. Why do the risky one? So what does the OGL do? The OGL says that whether or not these legal arguments have merit, whether or not you could win or lose a case in the venue that you choose to sue in, you don't have to worry about it, because as long as you follow this license and as long as you use the material that has been licensed with that license, you will not be sued. There is no risk. And weird things happen when values go to zero. Frictionless surfaces and, perfect spheres. Weird things happen in business when the risk is zero. You can get people to try something that they wouldn't try if it was only a 1% risk. Like, the difference between 1% and zero is binary. 1%, never going to try it. 0%, yeah, let's give it a whirl. Right? So the purpose of the open gaming license is just to tell people, as long as you follow these rules, you don't have to worry about being sued. And it served that purpose admirably for 22 years and 11 months.
That's amazing.
In fact, it's still serving that purpose, right? Because the open gaming license is irrevocable and it's still here today. And there are people who are still publishing with it, and they will for all time. And those people really don't have to worry about being sued. I mean, the risk is now no longer zero because Wizards has shown that they might sue, which is terrible, right? Because we're back to binary world again, and now there's a little bit of risk. And so there's a whole host of things no one will ever do because now the risk is not zero. But you can squint your eyes and say the risk is still zero.
Well, that is a great sort of segue to this question then. Um, since we're now living in a world where that risk is no longer zero,
Yeah.
and we definitely, I'm going to say since 2014, we're living in a amazing period of growth in the tabletop role-playing game industry.
Yep.
Where do you think the tabletop role-playing game industry is going?
Well, I mean, the arrows are all up, right? The graph is up and to the left. Yeah, two things have happened that are super important. The first thing is live play. The fact that millions of people are watching other people play a role-playing game is incredibly important, and it is one of the reasons that Dungeons and Dragons is skyrocketing in terms of its success. And it does so many things. The analogy I would make is golf. Like way more people watch golf than play golf. But if you go to a golf course, if you've never been to a golf course before, you probably know how to play golf. Like you may not know all the specific rules, but you understand the basic concept of you tee up, you whack the ball, and you try to get it in the hole. And you probably even picked up a fair bit of the culture of how you're supposed to play golf, right? Just from watching it being played by other people. Well, today, if you are interested in role-playing games and you go to the very first role-playing game session you've ever been to, it has been substantially demystified. You kind of know what you're supposed to do, and you even kind of know how to do it. And you have probably absorbed some of the culture of how it's done. And that demystification makes it so much easier to get people to give it a whirl, to try their first role-playing game. It doesn't feel weird and opaque, and you're not really worried if you're going to be asked to eat a spider or wear a silly hat or, pretend to be a witch. You've seen it. It's a bunch of people sitting around a table making jokes and rolling dice and like reading ridiculously large rule books to find chart 25A. It's really important how demystified the live play scene has been, and the fact that the live players are good at what they do. So they've established a benchmark. They've kind of shown people what they can aspire to if they get really good at being role-playing game players. And they can kind of see the gap probably between where they are and where they could be. And that creates an incentive to do better. So everybody's role-playing game experience is improving because they have a way of seeing how good they are compared to people who are truly really good at it. That's thing number one. Thing number two is crowdfunding. So many years ago, I was at a panel at Gen Con with Peter Atkinson and the guy who publishes The Burning Wheel, Luke Crane. And this was shortly after Luke's version of Burning Wheel called Mouse Guard had won the Origins Award for Best Role-Playing Game and beaten the 4th edition of Dungeons and Dragons. So Luke is a high-powered guy, and he knows his stuff. He made a good product. And in the Q&A session, the topic came up, did anybody think that it would be possible to make a commercially viable role-playing game in the market? And by commercially viable, we meant people could quit their jobs and work full-time on publishing a role-playing game. And Peter said no, and Luke said no, and I said no. I think that was in 2005. It's in that vicinity of time, right?
I'll look up Mouse Guard really quick.
Yeah. And just a couple of years after that, crowdfunding completely changed that equation. And I think that if we had that panel today, Peter would say yes, Luke would say yes, and I would say yes. And it's obviously true. There are people that are quitting their day jobs and becoming full-time professional role-playing game publishers. And it's because of crowdfunding, because we now have a mechanism which just works so much better than printing games, selling them to wholesalers who sell them to retailers who sell them to customers. It's the crowdfunding system lets you sell a PDF or a book or a hardcover book, plus a bunch of dice and an app. And like it is just better in so many ways. It has unlocked the commercial ability to publish games and games that in the past would have been like indie press games that would have sold 500 copies to the inside of the insiders. Maybe they sell 1,500 copies or 2,000 copies on crowdfunding, and they raise, 100 grand or 150 grand. Like it's a real thing that somebody could say, I'm going to be a role playing game publisher. This is going to be my life now. I would say in that meeting, 2005, in that panel, if I had been asked to guess how many people were full-time paid tabletop role-playing game designers, my answer would have been 50. That number could be 1,000 today. And it wouldn't shock me if it was 10,000. Like the value of that, of having that many people be able to make a profession out of role-playing games, just means that they're going to get better. They're going to experience the highs and the lows. They're going to get the feedback from their customers. They're going to interact with their peers, and it's all going to contribute to the state of the art just improving. I see no way that it can't just get better as more people do it, right? So to me, we live in a golden age of role playing, and I think that barring some non-game industry related catastrophe, I don't
Like a
really
tariff?
see I don't really see that it gets worse. I mean, even in the pandemic, when people weren't supposed to gather, it still got better. Yeah.
Are you
So
familiar
yeah,
with
I'm super bullish.
Are you familiar with Shadowdark?
No, but that doesn't mean I'm not familiar.
It's a OSR kind of fifth man, why can't I talk?
Blah, blah,
It's
blah.
it's sort of an OSR fifth edition, I don't want to say clone,
Okay.
hack, I'll say that's a better word.
Okay.
And it won a bunch of Emmy awards. It sold out at Gen Con. It was doing really, really well. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I bet they sold 10,000 physical copies of that book.
Yeah.
That was my guess in my head, 10,000
Yeah.
physical copies. And I asked the creator at Gen Con, not Gen Con, at Gary Con, so how many physical copies have you sold? And she said 50,000 copies. And I was like, what? 50?
50,000. Wow.
Yeah.
I thought that was going the opposite direction. I thought you were going to say 500. She sold 50,000 copies.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, those are TSR Planescape
They
numbers.
are, those are TSR numbers, dude. No
Yeah.
doubt. But
Yeah.
like a good TSR number, not even a bad TSR number.
Yeah, and admittedly that
50,000.
yeah, and it's a
Well,
really good
please see
game.
my comments of some moments ago. I stand by them completely now.
No,
Yeah, golden age, right?
I mean, it's some of us have said the golden age is dead, but maybe we were wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the golden age is always what you were doing when you were 16 years old, but
Yeah.
the business golden age is right now. It's no one has ever made as much money in role playing as today. And is there any argument to that?
So a lot of people have been kind of pissing on 2024 D&D,
Yeah,
and saying the sales numbers aren't that great.
sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm very skeptical of that. Like,
Skeptical that the numbers aren't great, or you're skeptical that
I'm skeptical, I would say, of the pissing on based on
okay.
the scant data that we have.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because my understanding is, did you work with Liz Shu or no?
I did, yeah.
Um, my understanding is that they have for 2024 D&D they recategorized D&D from like a publication to merchandise so that they wouldn't have so many returns because you can return a publication but you can't return merchandise, but that also means that it doesn't get counted by Bookscan and a bunch of other things.
Oh,
So
interesting.
so I'm like, it seems like they probably have hidden sales. They seem happy with the numbers. Like, and again, I don't think it's going to be able to sell as well as fifth edition just because fifth edition did as so incredibly well. But
Yeah.
if it just continues fifth edition's run, that would be great. Anyway, do you have any ear to the street thoughts on that?
I mean, you know my opinion on this. I think sales of Dungeons and Dragons are not that big. Um, so I kind of analyzed the quarterly reports that Hasbro is required to publish, trying to suss out what the numbers are for the various things that happen inside Wizards of the Coast. And they are very clever in the way they obfuscate the magic number. And because the magic number is obfuscated, it's very difficult to tease out a D&D number. But all that being said, I I think the D&D number, if you said, hold a gun to my head and said pick a number, I would say 20 million. $20 million in revenue. That's Dungeons and Dragons game publishing. So that doesn't include whatever royalty they're getting on Baldur's Gate 3 or the D&D movies or any. I probably wouldn't count D&D Beyond or whatever the current digital thing is. I'm talking about publishing role-playing game books and accessories. My guess is $20 million. And that is not a high watermark for Dungeons and Dragons in any sense of the imagination.
Yeah, TSR's best year was, I think, 38 million.
Yeah, that feels about right to me. And that was probably about $1987.
Well, supposedly that's 1996, I want to say. But I don't know. I've never been able to figure out if they were counting essentially loans from Random House in their bottom line.
Right.
So that could be very funny money numbers.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing too is their book business used to be way bigger than it is now too. The novels were huge, and that was back in a time when having a New York Times bestseller meant you sold a lot of books. So I'm sure that $38 million number is TSR, not Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So that novel business is a shadow of what it was.
Well,
I don't even know if they even still publish novels at Wizards of the Coast or if they've outsourced that to somebody else.
Like, I want to say one comes out a year or something like that. They just had a Ravenloft novel come out. But I want to say, again, off the top of my head, I'd have to look in my own book to really know for sure. But I want to say people said that half the business was novels, half was the role-playing game, in which case you're right that $20 million is not much more than TSR might have been doing in a good year.
Yeah. Now, I will say, I think the profitability on the books they publish now is probably fantastic. They're making $50, $60, $70 hardbacks, and they sell a lot of that stuff direct. And they, on top of that, whatever their digital business is, which I have a hard time figuring out, that's a great business. When they're selling a digital version of the Player's Handbook for whatever they sell it for, $40 or $50, that's good business. But the time that we're talking about now in 1996, Dungeons and Dragons was probably 50% or more of the total business of role-playing games. Today, whatever percentage, whatever the money is at Wizards of the Coast is like 10 or 20% of the total role-playing business. Like the amount of money being made outside of Wizards of the Coast is enormous. And that's a new phenomenon. So when I say that I feel like the business is in a golden age, that's what I mean. The total business of selling role-playing games from all publishers is probably bigger today than it has ever been in history.
So Mike Merles said that he thinks that the impact of the OGL crisis was that D&D is no longer cool. Do you think D&D is no longer cool?
Was D&D ever cool?
Let me tell you something, Ryan. Yes.
Okay.
Let me tell you, when I came back from the pandemic and I went into the teacher's lounge at my school, and every woman under 30 was talking about her D&D campaign.
Really?
I was like, what has happened to the world? It was just an earthquake for me. Like, if I walked into the teacher's lounge and people were talking about D&D and I had not instigated the conversation, that would have gotten my attention.
Right.
But the fact that it was every woman under 30 in the room, just, here's how my campaign is going. It was an earthquake for me.
Care about the open gaming license? Did the OGL crisis affect those women's opinion about D&D?
Half of them.
Really?
Yeah. Half of them cared. Half of them were like, well, it's their IP anyway, so can't they just do what they want?
I mean, I think if 10% of them cared, it would be meaningful. If half of them cared, it's really meaningful. Well, I think
so small sample size, but that's my story.
I think it fundamentally damaged the relationship between Wizards of the Coast and the D&D community in a way that no other event in the history of D&D has damaged its fan base. And while it was all happening, I had a conversation with Clark Peterson, who is the guy who kind of co-founded Sword and Sorcery with the White Wolf team. Was one of the very first D20 publishers. He's now a judge, so he's a high wattage guy. Like he has a lot on the ball. And he made a comment to me which I've never forgotten, which is that Dungeons and the right to publish Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm using that as a caveat for content license with the Open Gaming License, blah blah blah, is a fundamental human right. And Wizards of the Coast tried to take it away. And now I am not sitting here saying it's like abortion or the right to food or the right to health. I'm not saying that. But I am saying it's kind of in the same bucket. It is perceived by people who know and care as a inalienable human right. They are endowed by their creator with the right to make and publish Dungeons and Dragons content. And Wizards trying to take that away broke something unbelievably fundamental in the relationship between the company and its customers. And it made them angry. And angry people do things that unhappy people will never do.
All right. Well, would you be willing to tell me about your first day at Wizards of the Coast and your last day at Wizards of the Coast?
Yeah, my last day is easy. Let me see if I can think about my first day at Wizards of the Coast. So the first thing that was weird about my first day at Wizards of the Coast is that I wasn't at Wizards of the Coast. So the deal, quick backstory for those who haven't read Ben's book. The company that I was co-owner of and was the vice president of product development for was called Five Rings Publishing Group. We made trading card games like Legend of the Five Rings. We had inserted ourselves in the deal for Wizards of the Coast to buy TSR. And as a part of that transaction, they were obligated to buy my company as well, which they subsequently did. But unlike a lot of acquisitions, Five Rings Publishing was a standalone company that was operating just fine. We had our own office in Bellevue, which is about 30 minutes north of where the Wizards of the Coast office is or was in Renton. So going back and forth was no big deal. They had kind of bought us because they had to, not because they really wanted to. And so there really wasn't any part of the company that was like, oh yeah, we can't wait to get these, Five Rings Publishing people down here and get them integrated. Like it really wasn't that big of a deal. So I worked in an office that was not the Wizards of the Coast office for like 6 months. And I would go down to the Wizards office at least once a week for a management meeting that was all of the heads of all of the departments. And it was a meeting that was held in the morning. I want to say it was on a Tuesday, but I don't know that that's true. And it was like an hour and a half long, and it was just kind of a, what is the company doing meeting, right? And then our company, our business unit, had been placed into a group called New Brand Development and Licensing, run by a guy named Rich Fukutaki. And I would meet with Rich, and we would talk about the plans that we were operating under and what we were doing. And, he was kind of my mentor, and he was great about helping us get what we needed to got at Wizards, right? But we weren't really working at Wizards of the Coast. Like when you're not in the building and you're not interacting with those people every day and they don't really see you and no one really cares, it's not the same thing. Okay. So eventually the decision is made that we're going to close the Five Rings Publishing office. We're going to relocate everybody down to Renton, and we're going to work in the same area as MBD&L, and that Five Rings Publishing is going to slowly dissolve, which is what happened. So I do have a memory from close to my first day when that occurred, and this is my memory. There was this catalog of office supplies that got circulated, and we were basically told by Rich's admin assistant, if you need office supplies, here's this catalog. You can order what you need. Just, fill out this form, give it to me, and we'll get it for you. So people are ordered, paper, pencils, staplers, all that office crap. Well, I found this amazing printable whiteboard. So this thing was like a giant fax machine, and it was like whiteboard material, but it was on a cylindrical roll, right? And so you could write on it with regular whiteboard pens and then press a button, and it would rotate. And as it went through the edge of the board, it was going over a scanner, and the scanner would just output to thermal paper, right? So we could do this whiteboard exercise, and I'd push a button, the whiteboard would go through, rip this paper off, and I'd just hand it to somebody and say, go do that. Sorry, my camera's missing up here. It was fabulous.
It's amazing. It's action.
This technology was awesome, right? Okay, so it's in the book, and I filled out the form and I ordered one, and it like got delivered. And Rich walks by my office and he sees this thing. He's like, "What is that?" And I said, "Oh well, I whiteboard and printing. It's going to be awesome. It's so cool." It's like, "Who gave you permission to buy that?" I'm like, "Nobody. I just did it. Like I didn't know I needed permission." And he says, "Well, Ryan, here in corporate America, there's limits to what you're allowed to buy without permission." And I said, "Well, what's the limit?" And he kind of paused and he's like, I don't really know. Obviously, there has to be a limit. There must be a limit. Somewhere in this company, there's a document that says what different levels of management are allowed to spend without authority. But not ever having to ever consult it before, he didn't know what it was. Yeah, so that was like my first day at the Wizards of the Coast office, was me ordering this thing and getting it delivered. Okay, now that's a funny story, and there was a lot of good times in starting the movement to MBDNL. Now I'll tell you about my last day at Wizards of the Coast. My last day at Wizards of the Coast was September 11th, 2001.
Another Tuesday.
Yeah, so I had already exited the company by then. I was working on my startup, Organized Play, and I was mailing it in to the office. I would only go down there once or twice a week. I had no responsibilities that mattered. All the work I was doing, I could do from home, and I was doing it from home. And this is long before anybody did work from home. It was very light duty. And it was an output of a conversation that I had earlier that year with Vince Galori, who was the executive vice president, essentially the number 2 guy at Wizards. When I asked him, this was after I had successfully launched the 3rd edition of Dungeons and Dragons, done all of the D&D work that needed to be done to make the business, successful again. I had been basically moved on to other projects. And I asked him, what did my future look like at the company? And he said, "I don't think you have one. You should pursue other opportunities." Now, that's not what you really want to hear.
But it does seem to be the tradition with people who successfully launch an edition of D&D or unsuccessfully do so, for that matter. It's like it gets out the door and they chop your heads off pretty soon afterwards.
Yeah. So anyway, I was out of there. Like I was mailing it in. So my last day is scheduled to be September 11, 2001. And all that was supposed to happen on that day is I was supposed to have a brief meeting with Lauren, who was the president of Wizards of the Coast by then. As a formality, like the most formal, like the handshake goodbye meeting, like a nothing burger of a meeting. So I drive down to the office. Now, the Wizards of the Coast office was at the time relatively close to SeaTac, and the airports were all closed. So, spoiler alert, for those of you who didn't get the date, that's the day that the World Trade Centers were attacked and the Pentagon was attacked. Like that was the day. It happened that morning. So I drive down there, which takes forever because I'm going back roads and stuff because I can't be on the freeway. The freeway is completely choked with all the people trying to get in and out of the airport. So I show up and I'm late for my pro forma goodbye meeting with Lauren, and I'm sitting outside of his office, and his executive assistant is like, he'll call you when he's ready to see you. I sit there for, I don't know, an hour or so, something, I don't know, meaningless amount of time. And finally the door opens and he says, "Come in." So I go inside and he's a little angry. And he's like, "Hey, I know this is kind of formality, but, are you disrespecting me? Were you late on purpose?" And I said, "I was late because the airport's closed." And he says, "What?" And I said, "What have you been doing all day?" And he says, "Oh, I have this enormous stack of things I have to file with Hasbro. They've got me on this budget thing. I've been looking at these budget numbers since 7 o'clock this morning. I haven't had my nose out of this, this document since I had coffee, after I showed up." And I said, "I have some really bad news for you." And I had to tell him about the attacks and that the whole world was on fire. And he was like, "I think our meeting's over." And I said, "Yeah, I think so. Like, good luck. I have to go. I'm going home." Yeah, it was not a day that I have in my list of top 10 days of all time. Like it was ugly, weird and ugly. But I'll never forget that was my last day at Wizards of the Coast.
Well, this is another interview I've had with you where I have failed to discuss one of my primary passions in life, which is
Okay.
the Legend of the Five Rings role-playing game,
Ah,
which I assume that you have some things to say about. Maybe you don't.
yeah, less than you might think.
Oh, well, that makes me feel better then.
Okay.
Every time I get to about this point in a conversation with you, and I'm filled with at least a little bit of regret.
Okay.
Um, and John Wick has stood me up twice now.
Oh, really? I don't know if he likes to talk about L5R very much.
I mean, I don't know if he does or doesn't, but like,
Oh,
um, I've had people like not show up for interviews and be like, the president of Bethesda
right,
needed me. Oh,
right,
I'm sorry, the governor of Washington State.
right.
Like I'm in the press office now, and the governor called. And when people ditch me, typically they're like, "Here's a cogent reason for it."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, never got one from John Wick, and the second time he ghosted me, uh, I was like, I sent a hey, what happened? And he didn't even reply.
Why did that? Yeah.
I'm like,
Wow.
okay, I guess we're not going to talk, Mr. Wick.
Wow. You'll eventually get an interview with him, and it'll be great.
I hope so.
Yeah, he's
Um,
a great interview. He's got a lot to say.
so you also mentioned that you have a passion for the Indo-Europeans of Central Asia. Is that
I
right?
do. I'm
Tell me.
fascinated by the Bronze Age. It's Bronze Age and before, like the late Neolithic. It fascinates me.
So what is it about that period that fascinates you especially?
Okay, so many things. Most people on Earth, that's not a true statement. Maybe half of the people on Earth speak Proto-Indo-European. They speak a descendant of a language that originated in the steppes of Central Asia, either somewhere in Turkey or somewhere north of the Black Sea. The science is sketchy. And the people who spoke that language transmitted that language and parts of their culture as far west as Ireland and as far east as the Gobi Desert at the fringes of China. It is the basis of Sanskrit, which means that lots of people in India speak it. It is the basis of Latin, which means all of the Romance languages speak it. It is the basic basis of German, which means all the Germanic languages speak it. It's the basis of Greek. It is the basis of Anatolian languages, which some of which survive to this day, some of which do not. Um, yeah, those people were some of the most impactful humans who ever lived. And they lived in one of the most desolate, hard to live in places that humans have ever inhabited. The steppes of Asia are a dry, um, bushy, grassy land with very little water. Um, and their culture has things like a fascination with twins, which is why we know about the god Gemini and and are aware of there being mythological twin issues. They worshipped the sky father, and almost every one of their descendant cultures has a religion that's based on a father figure who lives in the sky. Um, they they had a very interesting cultural tradition called the guest host relationship, where if you were a guest or a host, you had certain obligations to the other party that made it possible for people to travel thousands of miles and show up at your campfire and not be immediately murdered. And that guest host thing is deeply embedded in the societies that their descendants lived in. We have endless cultural issues about how you treat your guests. Um, one of the interesting things is that one of the words that they used about the guest host relationship is cognate with, which means it is related through the changes in language to the word ghost. That's where we
Wow.
get the word ghost. Yeah, it's fascinating. They probably are the people who tamed horses. They probably are the people who invented the wagon. They are probably the people who invented the chariot. They were in contact with the people that invented the ability to smelt copper. I mean, they're fascinating in so many ways. And yet, because they lived in prehistory, we know almost nothing about them. We don't know what they called themselves. We have reconstructed their language by looking at the descendants of their language and finding words that are in common and applying various language laws that explain how words change over time. And we've reconstructed a vocabulary of about 1,500 words of the dialect that they spoke. Um, there are extremely limited archaeological traces of them. Like we know they existed, we know how important they were. They left us so much legacy, and yet we know so little about them. And now, coming full circle to what we were talking about just before the show started, this is one of the things that fascinates me. The people who walked out of Africa, pick a number, 300,000, 250,000, 150,000 years ago, they were effectively identical to us in every respect except their skin color and their hair color. Like their brains were the same, their cognitive abilities were the same, they had the same language skills, they had the same social habits. Like they were us in every way that matters, right? And for hundreds of thousands of years, they lived all across Eurasia, and we know almost nothing about them, about what they did, about what they cared about like what motivated, like we know almost nothing. It is fascinating to me to imagine these people in all these generations of human history. They cared, they had lots of things they cared about. They had very complicated societies. I mean, they built things, they moved around. We just have no way to know. It was before history. And then, for reasons that we just can't explain, we just don't know, 7,000 years ago, in various places around the world, some of which are physically not connected, Mesoamerica and Eurasia, people started to make cities. They had never done it before, ever, anywhere. Hundreds of thousands of years of humans, they'd never done this. And then for some weird reason, it starts. And like history begins. Hundreds of thousands of years, no history, bam, history. Like, what happened? Why? What did they do that for? Well, we are the heirs of that tradition. If you go into Dungeons and Dragons today, you are going to find weapons and tactics and gods and ideas about how the world operates, which are deeply rooted in what those Proto-Indo-Europeans were doing and their ancestors all the way back to Africa. Um, and people who weren't Proto-Indo-Europeans. You're going to find ancient Asian references from ancient China. You're going to find Mesoamerican stuff from ancient Mesoamerica. You're going to find things from Africa and Arabia. Like it, the games that we play are the literal embodiment of that history. Things that we have, that we pay attention to, that we care about, that are somehow, in some way, connected to those hundreds of thousands of years of humans just living and doing interesting things in their own special way that we'll never know about. It's amazing to me.
Well, that's a great closing. Uh, Well, I guess I'll ask this by way of Coda. What Alderac Entertainment Group product would you recommend people pick up?
I think the most exciting game we published in a long time is a game called Let's Go to Japan. The designer of that game is a guy named Josh Wood. Josh was planning a very elaborate trip to Japan just as COVID began, and he had to cancel it. And he channeled all of the knowledge and the passion that he had had about his plan to go to Japan into making a game about planning to go on a trip to Japan. And the thing that's cool about it is it's a two-part game. The first part is you basically are building your itinerary. What are you going to do on each of your 6 days in your trip to Japan? And then the second part is it's kind of a little role-playing thing. And you tell the other players in the game, you kind of role play what you do on your day in Japan. You don't have to. You can just add up the numbers and say, I scored 32 points. Or you can create this elaborate backstory for who you are and tell stories about who you meet and the places you go. Like you can add or subtract as much role playing from it as you want to, but it's not like a lot of other games I played, and it's beautiful and it's a fun game to play with, kids, adults. It's great. So highly recommended. Let's Go to Japan by Josh Wood.
I'm gonna have to pick it up because I lived in
Yeah,
Japan for about a year. A
right.
year. I met my wife in Japan, who is not Japanese. I managed to go to Japan and marry a Canadian. Um,
Nice.
Worked out well for her, and me. It's worked out well for all of us.
Okay.
But haven't been back in 20 years, and again, I'm like, oh my God, how have I? Like, I just never got back to Japan. How did that happen? Then again, I haven't been back to. I went to China for a year after that, and I haven't been back to China either. Haven't, and now I'm rambling about. I'm just old, Ryan. How did I get so old?
Well, I'm older than you, so I don't know what that tells us.
Well, you're retired, right?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, I am the chief operating officer for Alderac Entertainment Group. My job is making the company run so that creative people can make cool games.
Cool. Well, I would love to have you on again sometime. I can't. This has been really enjoyable. Think about who you would want to talk to in the role-playing game industry that you have not talked to, because that would be a fun conversation to hook you up with someone that you want to talk to that you haven't. So
yeah,
give it some thought.
All right, I will.
All right. Well, stay safe. For doing 2 interviews in a row. This is amazing.
Right.
And you have a good night, sir. Okay.
Yep. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.